This is IGN. A hip, smart holiday flick that's enjoyable for both kids and adults. This is an IGN Retro review of Elf from 2003. From the opening credit sequence, which pays homage to the classic Rankin-Bass holiday specials of the 60s, down to the Christmas images of New York City, it's clear that director Jon Favreau's first mainstream film is all about taking a nostalgic trip down Santa Claus Lane. That said trip is co-piloted by SNL vet Will Ferrell and should be a signal that the humor included will not only be goofy, but will appeal to hip adults as well as snot-nosed preteens. Much like this season's earlier comedic romp School of Rock, the joy inherent to Elf comes with the fact that it's a mainstream film made with indie sensibilities. That and the fact that the central character is played by a comedian with a huge, rabid, and borderline cult following. Beyond that, there's a healthy dose of heart and a fresh blast of creativity lurking at the core. But then, that should come as no surprise considering the assembled creative team who worked on the film. Granted, Favreau's previous directorial outing, Made, was a bit hit and miss. This time around, he proves that he's got the skills to ride the line between commercial appeal and cool left-of-centeredness. Sure, Elf is an obvious attempt at mainstream filmmaking. It's a Christmas film after all. But what sets it apart from the rest of the pack is that it works on a variety of levels. On one hand, it's a family film filled with the goofy, doofus antics of Ferrell. On the other hand, it's a nostalgic romp for hip, pop culture-loving young adults. It's kind of like the Muppet Movie in the way that it's fun but cool at the same time. This is something that very few family films ever manage to accomplish, and Favreau deserves a fair amount of credit for hitting the nail on the head throughout much of the film. In terms of storyline, the film essentially revolves around the time-tested and Hollywood-approved tale of a misfit, in this case Ferrell as the odd elf out buddy, trying desperately to fit into the world around him. Along the way, a reluctant hero at first exasperates and then wins over all those he comes in contact with. The result could have been a saccharine blast of faux holiday charm, but under the watchful direction of Favreau, it's a charming film that could very well become a modern holiday classic. Part of that charm is the fact that Favreau has loaded his film with generous helpings of cool references to past classics of the genre. He enlisted the aid of stop-motion animated specialists the Kyoto brothers to bring a fantastically skewed version of the North Pole to life. That in itself is a stroke of brilliance, but Favreau's choices go deeper into the collective pop culture consciousness. His casting of television comedic deities Bob Newhart and Ed Asner is spot on. His additional use of improv-oriented folks like Amy Sedaris, Andy Richter, Kyle Gass, and Artie Lang in bit parts is equally inspired. So too is Peter Dinklage as a volatile children's book author, but these are the obvious nuances. If you dig deeper, you'll discover cool cameos by cult historical musician Leon Redbone and stop-motion legend Ray Harryhausen. It's these little off-kilter touches that add a wonderful hidden depth to the film. While the various pop culture nods are cool, this is in reality the first star vehicle for comedian Will Ferrell. The sight of the tall, lanky Ferrell in yellow tights is enough to elicit uncontrolled bursts of laughter, but when he tacks on the childlike innocence and spastic sugar rush eccentricities, well, you can pretty much forget about catching your breath much of the time. This isn't to say that Ferrell doesn't go a little too far and his man-child antics don't wear thin occasionally, because they do, but for the most part, he comes off like a less abrasive Jerry Lewis or a less malleable Jim Carrey or even a less klutzy Chevy Chase. Such as the curse of being a physical comedian, you're always going to be compared to those in whose footsteps you follow. Frankly, I've never much cottoned to Ferrell, but this time he won me over with his playful blend of attention-starved hubris. Aside from his often over-the-top comedic romps, Ferrell plays off nicely against the old pros populating the film. His amped-up shtick balances out Newhart's understated deadpan rather nicely. And then there's the curmudgeonly James Caan, who plays Buddy's real father. The chemistry between the two is somewhat rote, but it still provides a nice touch. And what would a holiday film be without romance? In this case, Buddy the Elf falls for department store elf Jovi, played by Zooey Deschanel, and the two end up making beautiful music together, literally. Deschanel looks rather like a blonde-tressed Audrey Hepburn at times, and her doe-eyed reserve also plays well against Ferrell's ADD bravado. If the film falters at times, it's largely due to some of the physical comedy bits, especially after Buddy travels from the North Pole to New York City. Many of these tend to drag on a little too long. The result is that they often feel like mini vignettes or skits, if you will, which tend to take you out of the story and then drop you abruptly back into it. For example, some of Buddy's exploits in New York could have been pared down a bit, and speaking of abruptness, the near end of the film comes rather quickly. As is the case with all lovable geek stories, a grumpy individual must be won over. Khan is said grumpy grumper, playing the part with understated surliness, but he flips from being naughty to nice at the end with such sudden abruptness that it makes the conclusion feel rushed, especially after all the time spent setting up the love-infested musical punchline. Quibbles aside, Elf is what it is, and that would be a hip, smart holiday film that is as surprising as it is predictable. That said, perhaps the best thing to do is just sit back with a warm glass of eggnog and go along for the ride. Elf's IGN score? 7. Thanks for listening to IGN. My name is Tony Jackson, and for more holiday movie reviews, visit us at IGN.com.
Spoken Layer.